Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Manxiety Podcast.
We're your hosts, Ashad and Matt. Before we get started, if you're enjoying this show, please subscribe so you can get notified of new episodes.
If you want to share this with your friends, you can find us on all podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
This week, we have a special guest on our show. As Matt and I have spoken in detail about being in a fraternity and going back and being graduates now. While we were undergrads, we had the opportunity to meet a graduate at the time. His name is Matthew, and thank you for joining us on the podcast, Matthew.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So Matthew, obviously you know what the podcast is about, and I think it's very important to share all of our journeys through anxiety and sort of different types of anxiety, and that's what me and Matt have been doing for the better part of the year. But it's always good to have someone new who can bring their own experiences to the show, and I think it's very valuable to our listeners. So, if you want to kick it off with whatever, I guess your journey, and tell us about you.
Absolutely. I love to talk about my journey and talk about myself in general. So to talk a little bit about what I did after I graduated, and after I graduated from UC Irvine, I then went back to the Central Valley where I'm originally from, and I ended up working in marketing and public relations for a short while. But I always knew I wanted to go back to school. One, because I felt like there's so much more I still wanted to learn. And also because I was interested in teaching at the community college level. And to do that, you needed a master's degree. So I started applying for master's programs in communication studies specifically because while I was an undergrad at Irvine, I double majored, but quickly realized I should have just stuck with sort of the umbrella major, which was communication, because my undergrad was in journalism and film media. So I decided I wanted to go into communication studies, and I entered into CSU Northridge's program. And when I was in this program, I almost dropped out because I ran out of money. And fortunately, I had a teacher who was very influential on me. And when I told her that I was going to have to drop out of the program, she thought it was because it was too challenging. And actually, it was more financial based. So she said, don't drop out. Instead, what I'd like you to do is, apply for scholarships. I would write you a letter of recommendation. And have you ever thought about the teaching associateship program? And so that was my first introduction into being able to teach at the collegial level. Although I did technically do a UTeach opportunity at Irvine, where I designed and implemented my own course on YouTube. But that one in itself was its own learning experience. This was more within the field of what I was pursuing. So I was fortunate enough to apply and get a position. And that's when I actually started teaching while I was also pursuing my master's degree. And
that's amazing.
It was a great opportunity. Granted, we don't get paid as much as like the actual professors, but it was a great experience. And it really made the program more worthwhile because not only were we learning about all these theories and concepts and methods, but then we could also apply them in our own teaching as well. Because the program is very theory-based, and it's always great to have opportunities to apply this theory to something. So when I was in graduate school, I started teaching public speaking and argumentation as well. And what I've noticed quickly about when you talk to people about what you do for a living, I always say I'm a teacher, and they say, what do you teach? Or where do you teach? I say at the collegial level, and they're like, well, what do you teach? And I say public speaking. Or if I'm trying to engage or intrigue this person, I'll say, guess. So usually the hint I'll give them, because usually they guess like English or history for some reasons. And
I guess you have the look of a history teacher
I guess
or an English
so,
teacher.
that professorial look that only teaches in the humanities. and so I give them a hint like, we are never not doing this. And that sort of leads them a little psychology thinking. And then I was like, well, it's communication. So when you talk about that you teach public speaking, everyone likes to talk about how much they hate public speaking. Or they, on a rare occasion, talk about how a teacher who was a public speaking teacher was influential towards them. But mostly they talk about this fear of public speaking that they have. And for someone who has his own fears and anxieties, public speaking for me was not one of them. I just felt comfortable talking in front of a large audience. I knew that as long as I was prepared and knew what I was talking about and kept it concise and knew my audience, I was going to do fine.
Did you just picture everyone in their underwear?
Oh, no.
I've heard that always works.
Well, we'll talk about that later, but visualization is not something I recommend at all. It is, I feel like it's actually heightens your anxiety when you see people in such precarious states. But I ended up having these conversations with people. And for me, public speaking was easy until you realize that not every speech that you give or the occasion or context or setting is the same. So I'll share with you the last time I gave a big speech. And by big speech, I mean is like I had a large audience and it was like a big to-do, and it's in its own ritual, and which is the best man's toast at my brother's wedding. So before my brother got engaged, and I had always told him that if I was not his best man, I would not show up to his wedding. And fortunately, before he proposed, he asked me to I already knew I was going to be his best man. It was sort of, we have that, the nice thing about having a brother close in age is we, as we got older, started to relate more to one another. And as when he told me he was going to propose, we were already celebrating, acting like she said yes. And that's when I had this fear, this anxiety sort of creep up inside of me, unbeknownst to myself. And this was the first type of public speaking anxiety that people experience, which is the pre-preparation phase. And normally, as I stated earlier, I don't get anxious about speaking in front of an audience, but this was different. And what made it different was that my brother and I previously at my sister's wedding had given a speech that was very favorable to everyone who was there, which was mostly family. My sister married a man who didn't have a lot of family or friends, but most of the people in the audience I knew. So I was able to sort of understand the audience and sort of give this speech to this audience. And so my brother and I had this really good back and forth. It was really funny. There was a lot of moments of laughter. And what happened is once people found out my brother was engaged and that I was the best man, everyone had this expectation for me. And this expectation is, what is Matthew going to do that's going to make us laugh? And I was all for it. I thought, I was still riding high off of the excitement of the previous speech and the reaction from other people. But because this expectation was so high, I noticed that anxiety started to creep more and more inside of me. So that's when I started to experience pre-preparation anxiety. And pre-preparation anxiety is that moment you realize you have to give a speech. So when I talk to students about the different types, I always ask them, what was the moment you experienced pre-preparation anxiety? And they think, oh, it's the first day of school. Oh, no, it's when you signed up for the class. I'm like, really, it's when your counselor, your friend, or a classmate mentioned you had to take public speaking in order to fulfill the oral communication requirement to transfer or graduate from a community college or a CSU university. The UC system does not require oral communication as a requirement, which is interesting, but I'm not going to go into that.
Is that something, pre-preparation anxiety, is that something that you think everyone experiences, or is there varying levels to sort of all of these different anxieties?
Absolutely. Different levels for sure. Studies have shown people have the highest form of anxiety in the pre-preparation, when they're actually realize they have to give a speech, and also in the pre-performance stage. And so the pre-performance stage is the third one, right before you actually give the speech. So after the pre-preparation phase, you then move on into the preparation stage. And that's when I started to spend months trying to craft this best man's speech. I spent hours, sleepless nights. I had like 8 pages of single space notes of jokes, anecdotes, things I wanted to do. And in the end, I still wasn't done. And it was right after my brother proposed and my now sister-in-law said yes, 6 months later. Like I thought it was going to be one of those very common prolonged engagements, but no, she was like 6 months to the date after she said yes.
Wow.
And she was very organized. And what happened was I thought I had a lot of time, but the closer and closer you get to it, the more anxiety you start to feel. So it wasn't quite done. Like I'd done a few run throughs, I pitched a few ideas, but they weren't landing yet. But I felt like this is sort of the same feeling I was having in the speech that my brother and I gave at my sister's wedding. So it's all part of the process. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and my brother and his now wife were getting married in our hometown in the Central Valley. So as the days were leading up to it, I had a speech and I had notes, but it wasn't a fully formed speech yet. I ended up driving up the day of the rehearsal. And when I drove up the day of the rehearsal, I get to my parents' house, and my mother is, of course, going around getting things ready for the rehearsal dinner, which she and my father were hosting. And then one of my sisters, I have 3 older sisters, one of my sisters was there. And I remember her saying something along the lines of, I don't want to burden you, or I don't want to add more pressure to you, but people have really high expectations for this speech. And I was like, great. All right. So I'm thinking this is just fuel for the fire. Then I go to the rehearsal dinner, and my other sister made this comment about, oh, we found someone who's going to record your speech. It's going to be great. And I'm like, awesome. So we have documentation.
It's making your anxiety more and more.
My anxiety is rising at this point. And then it's at that point where I'm not even enjoying the moment. I'm so
Right.
like rehearsing in my head. I'm thinking of like what I should say. And then I didn't even go out that night, I think, or actually I cut it short, because usually married couples, they'll go out the night before at the rehearsal dinner, just some time with the friends. I don't even think I did that. I think all my brother and his groomsmen went out, and then I went back to his place and I just kept working on the speech. And the next day I'm getting ready with my brother, and then we go to our parents' house where all the groomsmen were meeting. And one of my other sister was there, and she was my ride to the church. And I had asked her to print out the speech because I was like, okay, it's as formulated as I can make it. And she prints it out for me. And then we're driving to the church, and there's this pause. And then all of a sudden we're at the stoplight, and she turns to me and she's like, so I looked over your speech and I'm not so sure about a few parts. and I was like, great. So I'm about to walk down this aisle with my brother by his side and witness this ritual, this ceremony. And I'm just like trying not to pass out. I'm feeling so anxious and worried. And then even in the photos themselves, and I feel bad, you could tell I'm not having a good time. Like I have like these grimaces, or I have like these fake smiles. And it's probably because I kept rehearsing my speech in my head. And then we get to the actual ceremony, because the one thing I don't like about being in a wedding party is you don't get to enjoy it as much as when you're actually a guest, because there's a lot of labor that's pretty intensive. So finally,
a lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility
you have to do,
especially when you're like a key role, like best man or maid of honor, or the presider. So we get to the ceremony. They introduce us with Star Wars, like the Star Wars theme music. I'm not a musically inclined person, so you're just gonna have to imagine it for yourself. But I enter there, and then I'm mingling here and there, and people keep bringing up this speech, like, "Hey, are you gonna, give a toast like you did your brother-in-law?" And a toast is a combination of a toast and a roast. So you're talking about how great they are, but you're also mentioning what's not so great about them, kind of poking a little bit of fun at them.
That's funny.
And so I'm getting all of this from all these people, and I'm trying to keep my composure and not freak out. And then it comes to that point where we're all seated down, and I don't know if it was before or after dinner. I think it was after dinner, because if it was before, I don't even remember eating that much. But I ended up standing when the DJ calls up for the maid of honor and the best man to give their speeches. And my sister-in-law's younger sister was the maid of honor. And so she gave her speech, which was essentially her crying into a microphone for like 2 minutes. And it was not
was it rehearsed?
She actually wrote it on the way to the church. And
I
she
meant the
lived-
crying.
Yeah, it was on the right. It was like 15 minutes. So I've been spending like 6 months in torture here over this speech. And she's like, 15 minutes, got it. And so she gave the speech and she's just crying. And I'm like standing next to her and I'm not even comprehending what's going on. So then the DJ calls me up and says, all right, now we're going to hear from the best man, Matthew. And then the audience gives this like, woo, like they're really excited for this speech. And I open up with this joke. And this is the joke I love to say in regards to my brother and I because of our chosen professions. I teach public speaking and my brother is a funeral assistant. So we both make our living off of other people's fears, which is this idea of, you know, death or giving a public speech. And I gave this joke, this is like my lead in, and nobody laughed. And that's hard when you start off with a joke and nobody laughs. I mean, there might have been a couple of chuckles, but the audience was different this time around. I had mentioned earlier it was mainly family and friends whom I had known, but my brother had married someone who came from a large family. And her family was very centralized in the area. So there was a lot of them in the area. And even the ones that lived abroad or in another state still came in for this wedding. So we were actually outnumbered for the first time. And I don't even remember another occasion in which we were outnumbered, but we were outnumbered. And I opened up with this joke and then nobody laughed. And the dread of the 6 months was there and it was actualized. And I had this moment of, okay, you know, I had two options. One, I could just sort of not give the speech and just say, you know, all right, well, thank you everyone for being here and just sit down. Or I could continue on with the speech. So I went with option B and I continued on with the speech.
Or option C, just cry into the mic.
You know,
that was definitely a good option too,
right?
The option was
you
already
can
taken. So
out ugly cry the maid of honor.
You know, we should have just done our speech together and cried in the microphone. There you go.
Well, I think the fact that it was already done was a reason why you could have used it again.
I mean, like, you know, why not? But I ended up having that moment of, all right, we got to do this. I spent a lot of work on it, and I did it. And then I said my last part, which is like raising the glass, and I got like a light clap, like kind of. Like
Matt, I think Matthew deserves a round of applause.
Thank you.
There you go.
Like,
hey, I would laugh to that joke. I'm just saying, okay. You would have heard a ha.
Exactly. I mean, I just like even a light chuckle. Like that was my softball warm up, and and I ended up after that just sort of going through the post performance. So the pre performance was me leading up to when I actually gave the speech. So listening to my sister-in-law, being at that venue, because those are the moments leading up to when you have to give the speech. And so this is really hard for some people, especially like in a classroom setting, where if they're like number 6 in the list of 7 speakers, they're so focused on themselves and their own speech, they're not even listening to the previous speakers as well, because they're in tune with what's going on. So
that's when I usually have the most anxiety, actually, is the pre-performance.
It's very
it just personally, yeah, I'm usually good. Pre-preparation, maybe a little bit. Preparation, no anxiety. When it gets to pre-performance, though, especially if I have to wait.
Oh, yeah.
In any case, where it's like if something's running late or whatever it is and I have to wait longer, my anxiety just keeps spiking more and more.
Absolutely. It's
especially if it's at the end of the class day and you're like, am I gonna go the next day? You know, everybody would always pick to go like, yeah, we'll go 5th, you know, nobody wants to go first. And then you're just staring at the clock like, are we going to run out of time? And then eventually they're like, oh, you know, let's just call it for today. And you're like, yes. Then you realize you're going first tomorrow.
Yeah. But I mean, I always feel like you're always as prepared as you can in the moment. But I definitely have those students for sure, Matt. And I got to tell you, when they ask, are you sure, you know, you want me to go? We only have so much time. And I'm like, I absolutely want you to go and do this speech. I would hate to have to delay it 2 more days or whatever until you have to do it again. And so there's a performance anxiety. That's the stage in which you are giving the speech and then performing. Absolutely. And then there's the one thing that you don't realize after you give the speech is the post-performance anxiety. And this is when your inner critic comes out, and it's basically pinpointing all the things that went wrong in your entire speech and neglecting anything that went right. And my post-performance anxiety was high. And I basically remember, actually, well, what I've been told is after I gave my speech, I basically, for the rest of the evening, was no more than 6 feet away from the bar. And you know, and like some people, like my godmother said it was a good speech, but I also felt like she's my godmother and she's always gonna think whatever I do is great. And then but you know, it's always awkward when you're about to cross paths with someone at this event. And usually at this event, like everyone's really friendly and excited to see each other. But when you're about to cross paths with someone you know, and you can feel them tensing up before they cross paths with you.
Like, what am I going to say to him after the speech?
Exactly. And so you just got to play it off. And so I went through the motions of just, you know, it is what it is. And I can't dwell on it because I did the best I could given the situation. And so what I love telling the speech, or the reason I love telling the speech, is because not only does it demonstrate the different types of public speaking anxiety, stages like pre-performance or pre-preparation, preparation, pre-performance, performance, and post-performance. But I also let students know that public speaking anxiety or communication apprehension is something that we all experience and doesn't really go away. You just learn to manage it. Because when I had given that best man's toast or speech, it was after I had been teaching public speaking for over 2 years. So it was clearly a sign of those who can't do teach. But ideally, I use it to reinforce this idea of it's a skill. You got to keep practicing, preparing, and you got to accept the fact that sometimes it's not going to go as well as you'd hoped. And you just got to self-reflect and strive to do better next time. And so I haven't had the opportunity to give any other best man's speeches, and I don't think I'll ever will. But what I like about this one is years later, people still keep coming up to me, especially my sister-in-law's side of the family or their close friends. And they keep referring to me like, oh, he's the speech guy. He's the best man's toast guy. And then I've come to realize, I feel like after a while, this speech is starting to get reevaluated in a different context. You know how some movies weren't big when they came out, but then they can become like cult followings and then they get like midnight showings. And so I feel like this speech is sort of like the the Orson Welles movie, the Citizen Kane of best man speeches, if you will. Not appreciated for when it first came out, but later on reevaluated and appreciated.
It just had to simmer a little bit. People had to, let it simmer, and then they understood. It became better and better.
Absolutely. You had to be small doses, I feel like, people to really take it in. All at once is probably just too overwhelming, and they needed time to process what they just
definitely
witnessed. Yeah,
I have a best man speech story for you as well. I'll make it super quick though. My big bro in the fraternity got married this year, and so at some point last year he asked me to be his best man. So of course I agreed and went through some of the same motions, right? Pre-preparation anxiety, a little bit as soon as he asked. I was like, I need to write a speech.
Mm-hmm.
I went through all those motions. The preparation sort of as it got closer, but then mine changed a little bit. So as I was preparing and as I was thinking about what I'm going to write, and I had, I had a couple of months, maybe like 5 or 6 months, similar to you, but I wasn't, super stressed about it. I tend to prepare, but I try to leave a little bit of it to just do it on the spot a little bit, or as it gets closer, just because it helps me think about it. I'll write down ideas, but I won't make anything until the time comes.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we're obviously COVID hit, so they had to make some changes, and they decided that they're not going to do after the ceremony, they're not going to do any kind of reception. So that got moved. So then it was just a ceremony, and I took a deep breath because I was like, hey, there's no reception. I don't have to give the speech.
There you go.
So as it gets closer, we're probably about 3-4 weeks out at this point. 3 weeks out, sorry. And he calls me one day. Maybe it was less than it was 2 weeks out. He calls me, and the guy that was supposed to do the ceremony, right? It was one of our other friends, again from the fraternity, and he had just found out that he may have been exposed to COVID.
Ooh.
So he calls me and he's like, "Hey, like, I hate to ask this, but do you think you can do the ceremony for us?" So, of course, I'm the best man. I'll do what I need to make sure that the day goes well. So I went, I got ordained, and so now
Did you
I
get
had
ordained online.
Yeah, I did.
All right.
The Universal Life Church.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Yep. So now I had a second phase of pre-preparation anxiety. And preparation anxiety. I had 2 weeks to write to convert my my best man speech into a ceremony, and learn what I'm actually supposed to say during the ceremony. So I went through very, very much of the same motions. I converted it, I wrote it down, did a lot of practicing, and then pre-performance comes, and so we're there, and we're supposed to start at, I think, like 4. So they delay it a little bit. Now, that's when my anxiety starts spiking, and that's the worst for me, is the pre-performance portion, because no matter how much I prepared, if I go there and I gave the speech at 4, completely fine.
Yeah.
But if I have to go there and now I'm waiting, not fine. Luckily, I had pre-planned for this as well, so I had a little flask of whiskey on me. So went off to the side, took a little swig.
Yep.
Gave it a couple minutes to set in. But anyway, I gave the speech, I did the ceremony. Performance was my performance anxiety seems to start off at the top, and then it goes down sort of as I get going. So gave the speech, ceremony, and then it was over. And I think the best part, or the best way to not have post-performance anxiety, I learned that day, is when you finish giving the ceremony and the people come up to you, especially people you've never met, and they tell you how good the ceremony was. So as soon as that happened, their family came up, and the people I've never met, they were like, it was such an amazing ceremony, this and that. Just any anxiety about any post-performance anxiety was completely gone.
Well, that's good, and I especially like your approach to taking a swig of something. I don't know if I drank before my brother's wedding or not. I probably was afraid it would affect my ability to speak or not. But I was actually just thinking about when you were having to do your ceremony and convert your speech into an actual ceremony. Did you have like anecdotes or stories you had to take out, or was there anything like you wish you could have said, but it sort of the context had changed?
I mean, there was definitely stuff I wanted to say that obviously I didn't want to say during the ceremony. So the context had definitely changed. There weren't really any stories that I was going to say that I don't think could have, that would have been out of place. But keeping in mind that most of the people there were their families, because of COVID, it was a much smaller wedding. It was very, very close people. So I did have to keep that in mind and sort of only say things that were family appropriate. Whereas if it was the best man speech and we were at a reception, I think I may have said, at least told another story or two that may have, teetered within that gray area of if it's acceptable or not.
And I can't emphasize enough, when you're about to tell stories about someone, you always need someone who's close to not only you, but the person that you're going to be talking about, to get their approval. I know with my sister, the speech my brother and I gave at my sister's wedding, we went through my sister, Sarah, and if she wasn't sure, she then went to her mother. And if our mom laughed, we knew that was a go.
After I wrote down the ceremony, I sent it to both of, or I suggested to send it to both of them. Just to make sure they were okay with it. I obviously, it's their ceremony, it's their wedding. I didn't want to say anything or make it in any way that they didn't like or enjoy. But they they didn't want to hear it. They just, they trusted me, so it worked out.
That's good, because I can't tell you how many occasions there at weddings where people bring up when people gave speeches that weren't appropriate, and they tend to remember the awkwardness more so than what was said. So
Right.
I really feel like anytime you give that type of speech, if you're going to be funny or share embarrassing stories or just funny stories, you always need that second opinion of whether or not this would be appropriate or not, because the last thing you want to do when you're giving a speech is give a memorable speech that's more infamous than for its heartwarming message.
Yeah, you want people to remember the wedding, not your speech.
True that.
No, there was a story I wanted to tell if I gave the best man speech.
Oh, yeah.
Or not a story, but I guess a small anecdote about how I was going to be happy now that he was getting married.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't be getting calls at 3 a.m. to tell him his drunk ass to get in the car and go home. But obviously that was not very appropriate for the ceremony, so that got cut.
I went through my brother-in-law, who, granted, I don't think was the best person for approval on certain things I wanted to say about my brother. So when I said those things, and I'm not going to mention them in this podcast, but I will say that when I did say them, the only table that laughed in the entire reception was the table that consisted of like all my male cousins. And then it's like, and then my brother-in-law's, he was also in the wedding party. And so he's like laughing, giving me the thumbs up. So I made this joke about on my brother's expense, and it's related to Star Wars. And I realized this is why knowing your audience is so important in the context and setting, because I feel like I shouldn't have told that joke because it was for a select few and not everyone. And
right.
So I definitely will say that when it comes to things like strategies, knowing your audience is so important when you're crafting your speech. Absolutely.
I completely agree. Unless you have any other best man stories, we can talk about something else. Matt, do you have any best man stories?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't.
You've been awfully quiet. I know we have another Matthew on the show today, but you can still talk. We're not replacing you with a new Matthew.
I was worried this is the interview replacement. It's like all of a sudden I'm training the new guy to take over my job. It's like it's like Matthew. Do you go by Matt or Matthew? What can I call you? It's just real easy for a shot. It's like a shot's like I don't know, like an old guy or something. Just he calls everybody Matt. Like it doesn't matter if the co-host in the future his name is John or something. Like so Matt, just like
exactly. It's like James Bond, just replacing the actor necessarily.
Yeah,
I definitely will say that when it comes to talking a lot, I definitely think it's like a Matthew thing. Like I feel like Matthews generally talk a lot, but I love the rapport shot between you and I right now. And if there ever comes a day where Matt's no longer popular and market research is showing that his likability has taken a dive, then we could always try this out again for sure.
No, definitely. The only problem is I'm afraid if I replace Matt with another Matthew, people might not be able to tell the difference, and then I don't know if that'll ever go back up.
Hey, new thought. Let's just replace a shot.
But then you won't have a show.
No, we will have a show. We'll have tons of content.
Maybe you'll just have 24-hour live shows. It'll never end.
Yeah, all the antics we get into. But it is something that I am fascinated by what Matthew has to say. We've been friends for a long time, and I know that he's obviously taught public speaking and taught in all these different courses. And it's just I'm practicing being a good listener, and I'm really in depth in this conversation and really loving it. So
no, we appreciate that. Being good listeners is very good, but being a good listener when you're hosting a podcast is not very good, because you want to engage with your interviewee, dude.
No, honestly though,
No,
I give him a lot of crap.
Let's discuss this, okay?
You don't need to defend him.
How
He's
would
fine.
you, as somebody who teaches public speaking, give a shot a little bit of advice? Because you know what? When there's a guest, he's Mr. Talk, 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 talk. But as soon as there's no guest, what does he do? He's like, all right, Matt, you're talking too much. Can you stop, please, please, please? You know? Look at this guy. All of a sudden, he's got all this confidence, huh? His clearly his performance anxiety is very low today.
We've been doing this for a year. I have no performance anxiety at this point.
Me neither. We just hit record and go.
Yep.
Well, I will say that, it's great to be here for sure, because this is something that I think that men need to talk more about. And it's sort of like the elephant in the room. And once you sort of start opening up and being a little bit vulnerable, especially when the situation calls for it, or when you're with people that you trust and know, then I really feel like it sort of leads to these deeper, more enriching conversations about life. And then you really start to feel more connected with each other. I know personally, I got a mentor recently who is a cousin that married into my family, and he's older, but at the same time also he's sort of at a point in his life where he is also as a mentor. And so when I had breached the topic of, I'm looking for a mentor, and so he was totally down for it. And with the nice thing about someone who has a mentor already, they kind of already know what you're looking for. And so I definitely will say that this podcast is something that, I feel like a lot of people wish they had done, or it was an idea that they probably had. And I'm just glad that we finally had someone who went about and did it finally. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't know if you know the story, but we actually wanted to start this podcast 4 years ago at this point.
Oh, yeah?
And so we got together, and that was right when we were sort of in the depths of our high anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So we got together, we recorded a handful of episodes, maybe 3-4 episodes. Mm-hmm. But then we just never published. We recorded. We felt great. we had our own therapy. We felt great. And then we didn't have enough time to devote to actually publishing and editing and doing all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So we just sort of left it. And it wasn't until sort of 2020 came around, we had a little bit more time because of the lockdown, because of being home more, that we finally had enough time to jumpstart it again and actually get it going.
Cool. Well, like I said, this is great. And I remember I was really into podcasts, right in 2020, I was really into podcasts. And when I came across your guys' podcast, like I started listening to episodes, and I also started following you on Instagram. And there were a few times where you've posted infographics that I thought were not only hilarious, but very relatable. There was one where you talked about work ethic. Or a strong work ethic. And for an anxious person, what that really means is you're so fearful of losing your job, you're going to do as much as you can in order to keep it, type of thing. And I was like, I totally empathize with that. I too have found myself having a strong work ethic, not because I value it, but because I fear,
right,
what would happen if I'm not good at my job.
Yeah, and my wife Andrea is the mastermind behind all those memes and our social media presence. So I'll let her know that she's doing at least a good job on some of the posts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't go on Instagram as much as I used to. It's one of those apps that I basically use to either watch Olympic lifting videos, or I will sometimes, like if it's family, they'll post pictures that especially of my nephews, and so I'll watch on those pictures, but I don't comment or like anymore. I haven't for the last several years, mainly because I don't want to engage in it right. That. I appreciate when people post stuff, but at the same time also it's just not something I feel is good for mental health for a lot of people.
We completely agree.
Definitely.
And I definitely will say, if it's a brand, then put your content out there. But I'm not big on the whole idea of why people choose to engage in social media. I definitely feel like if you want to be a part of that community, it's not just passively consuming, but also actively engaging in it as well. But but sharing not for the self glorification or gratification of yourself, but more just be able to continue the conversation or add to what is being already shared.
Right. Yeah, and we have, I think, 2 episodes specifically on social media and social media anxiety, because it's such a big topic, and there's so much anxiety that comes with, posting the right picture, getting enough likes. I mean, and Instagram and some of these other big social media giants have realized this, right? That's why they've rolled out these updates about hiding your likes now, so that you and others can't see them, and doing all these things to try and curb the impact that it's had on people's mental health.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that there's people who have the power that are taking responsibility for it.
To some extent.
I think it's, I mean, it's still a bit,
so they can still have people on the platform.
Well.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, it's definitely for their. Yeah, it's definitely for their profit, but at least it's helping people a little bit.
You got to keep the client happy, the consumer content.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, what you said, Matthew, really illustrated that point, because you're on Instagram every once in a while. You're not liking, you're not commenting, you're just kind of a passerby in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they post for gratification, right? Am I going to get X amount of likes? Did people like my photo? Did I look pretty? Did they comment? Whatever. But then they don't realize that a lot of times when they're probably using the platform as well, they're doing the same thing you're doing, right? They're just scrolling past. It's almost like it's too much effort to double tap now, right? Before it was like everything had to be liked, right? Just you go down your list when it was chronological and bam, 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 all my friends. Oh my God, look, there's a dog, there's a cat, whatever. Now you get to the point where you're like, I'm just kind of scrolling by, whatever. But then you don't realize like that's contributing to their like post as well, right? And it depends on why they're doing it. So like you said, if somebody opens up and they're posting something like a serious topic, I'd make sure to like it because I'm like, hey, I'm here, or I comment on it, whatever. But if it's just a picture of like what they ate, or I don't know, something like some sunset or something, I'm like, whatever. It's not like enriching my life, so I just scroll on by. So it kind of induces its own problem.
Exactly. And what I use it for is my own purpose of, because I'm a weightlifter and I do, as a hobby, Olympic lifting. What has added to my knowledge is being able to watch these videos of, professionals who have been doing it for years, and even people who I was trained with, see them lift. And I think it's just sort of allows me to see proper technique and form that I normally wouldn't get. And because it's Instagram and they're just short snippets, I could actually watch the same movement over and over again, because a lift like a snatch or a clean and jerk is a relatively quick movement. So with the loop or the replay or me going up and down to restart the video allows me to watch it over and over again. And then I'm able to take what I saw and then figure out a way to incorporate it into my own technique work as well. And then with just family photos, as I mentioned with the nephews, I'm in a group text with my family. It's called primary group because in types of groups, the first group that you are a part of is your family, which is your primary group. So we call it primary group. And in this group text, I'm always getting photos or videos of my nephews, but I always feel like anything with my nephews is great, but I feel like the quality isn't as great as the ones that they save to post online. So those are the ones that those are the blue ribbon photo, essay winning photos, or that
the social media worthy ones.
Exactly. No filter. Hashtag.
Yeah. That's funny. I know we kind of went off the far end of talking about public speaking, but was there anything else that you wanted to touch upon as it relates to public speaking?
Oh, sure. If you'd like, I could go over the different kinds of communication apprehension, trait anxiety, state anxiety, scrutiny fear, and that could lead me to talking about some strategies for public speaking, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be very valuable to both us and all of the listeners.
Absolutely. So this fear of public speaking, it's also referred to as communication apprehension. And why people have this apprehension towards communicating in public has to deal with a lot of things. Like, I don't want to go all the way back to the history of public speaking, to the ancient Greeks and how they memorized speeches. And it was considered the greatest form of knowledge. But I feel
Well,
like,
can I interject real quick?
please.
When you're teaching your classes, do you give a better grade, or is it do you ask your students to memorize their speeches? Speaking of memorization,
That's one of the first questions I get after, do I offer extra credit? And no, I don't offer extra credit. But I do get some students who think you have to memorize the speech. And I'm like, no, don't memorize your speech. It went out with the Greeks, mainly because when you memorize, it comes off very rehearsed and it doesn't feel like authentic or real or natural. And when people are giving speeches, they think it's bad to use vocal fillers like or and excessively, absolutely. But on occasion, if you interject with a or that's fine. Just don't keep drawing attention to it. So I've had some students who it's like every other word is or they do hedges like, or right. Did you know? No.
or like, yeah.
Like,
Hey,
there's
let's
another
not
one.
talk about right. Okay, I say right every other word.
So if they become excessive, then they're going to take away from the message. But I definitely will say, I tell students, don't memorize their speeches because they are allowed notes. And the notes that they're allowed is called a preparation outline, where it's essentially like keywords or phrases, things that they will elaborate upon. And so when a student is giving a speech in my class, it's broken up into various stages. So I'll give them the prompt. So I'll give an example of an informative speech. And the prompt for the informative speech is that they have to explain a concept, theory, or issue that they learned about in one of their other classes that they are taking at the college level. So it's a process for them to actually give the speech itself. Because I noticed when I assigned a speech, students tend to wait to do everything the night before. And so I broke it up into different parts. So a month before they actually give the speech, they choose a topic. Then a week later, they do an annotated bibliography, which is when they conduct research. And I require that there be one primary source and 6 secondary sources. And then they will do what is referred to as a preparation outline. And so the preparation outline is a full sentence outline that essentially lets them know, or for me, the teacher lets me know what they're going to be speaking and sharing. And so that's when they would include their citations, their fully fleshed out speech. But what I don't want them to do is to read off their speech, because then it becomes very boring and monotonous. And besides memory, there is other methods of delivery, such as memory, impromptu. Then there's manuscript, which is when they would actually read off of their outline. And then there would be extemporaneous. And
what does extemporaneous mean?
Extemporaneous means that they are giving a speech using brief notes. And the brief notes comes in the form of a speaking outline. So once they do their preparation outline, I have them condense it into keywords and phrases. Because what I want them to do is have notes that aren't verbatim what they're going to say, because then they read. And like I mentioned, it's very difficult to listen to. So they have keywords or phrases to remind them what it is that they're going to talk about. So I talk about how I have like a lesson plan that's very detailed, but when I use PowerPoint in a lecture, it's just keywords or phrases. And then even though I have my notes, I try to go off of the PowerPoint as much as I can, because then it keeps the lecture more fluid and as opposed to having to like read off of like a legal pad of paper.
Right.
And so once they do the speaking outline, if there's a visual aid requirement, something along the lines of like a poster board or a PowerPoint, there's also that. And then there's the actual speech itself. And the speech is worth a majority of the points, but it's not only just about the speech. Because I've had some students who get really anxious and they're very shy and socially awkward or socially anxious. And I get it, but at the same time, also, I can't play favorites or take into account these things unless, of course, it's documented and they go through DSPS or Disability Services, and because then they will let me know what I can do, because I'm not trained in that as much as they are, so they help me along that way.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, so that's how I sort of break down the speech of why they give it. And I forgot why we were on this topic, because we were
I
segueing into
asked you
strategies.
about whether you ask your students to memorize their speeches or not. But going back to what you were saying, it's interesting that you say that when people memorize their speeches, it sounds like it doesn't sound natural.
What do you mean?
Uh,
It sounds like a talking robot when they read off of what they are saying.
well, no, that's what I meant. Is when I tend to read off of something I wrote, I sound like a robot because I'm reading verbatim. Whereas I guess what I was trying to say was when I memorize something, I don't remember everything exactly as I said it, but at least I remember the major points. So as I'm speaking, and I guess it's more along the lines of the extemporaneous delivery.
That's correct.
Where I'll memorize the speech I wrote, and then I'll have like points that I want to hit upon, but I'll convey the speech, just not word for word.
So that's how I sort of craft the speech. And the other thing also going along the lines of when you're giving a speech is I teach them a certain formula. It's a very standard formula for giving a speech. With that being said, there's three parts: the intro, body, and conclusion. Introduction is probably the most important because that's going to engage your audience. So the very first thing you do, you got to grab their attention, because people aren't just going to automatically start listening to you because you're talking. And then you got to build credibility so that they trust you. And then you got to explain to them why they should care. And that's the audience relevance. Then you have the central idea and then the preview points. So that's the structure of the speech. Then leads to the body, which has the main and supporting points. And that's when they would bring in their supporting evidence. And then from there, it's the conclusion, where they just essentially tell us what they've already said. Now, in terms of strategies, when it comes to giving a speech, there's a variety of strategies that you can choose from. I used to open up with this joke about what's the best way to get to Carnegie Hall. And then I realized that not a lot of people know what Carnegie Music Hall is anymore. I feel like they're just more along the lines of like they don't know where it is, so they don't get the joke, which is the best way to get to Carnegie Music Hall is practice, because it's a music hall and you have to be really good.
Right.
I know, right? Once I started explaining the joke, that's when I realized I probably shouldn't use this joke anymore when I talk about strategies.
You're gonna have to
I think
change it to
now-
TikTok. What's the
I was
best way
about to
to
say
get
that.
on TikTok or something? Practice.
I'm actually not on TikTok, so I don't know much about TikToks, but I do get occasional TikToks sent to me.
Yeah, neither am I. I don't
Yeah.
want the Chinese stealing my data.
Well, it's
I
just,
just see them posted on Instagram. So.
So I think it's just one of those, like, it's one more thing to do. It's like
Definitely.
Snapchat. It's like I never got into Snapchat because it's just one more thing to do, and I'm maxed out right now.
Yeah, I get you. What are some of the other strategies for public speaking?
Oh yeah, so practice and preparation is key. The other one that I always like to emphasize, but it's really hard for some people, is being enthusiastic. So this goes along the lines of sort of the fake it till you make it, or fake it till you become it mentality. But it's not so much about you changing your mindset. It's you sort of manipulating the audience into believing you're this confident person. Because if you're enthusiastic about it, your anxiety tends to go down, and then people register that, oh, this person is very charismatic. They're very confident. We should listen to what they have to say, because if they're this big of a believer in what they're talking about, then we must listen. So,
We've spoken a little bit about that as well before, and there are studies that show that when you basically fake it, right? When you put a smile on, when you walk with your sort of chest up, shoulders back, in a more positive, I guess, stature.
Yeah.
You trick your body into producing those hormones to actually make you feel that way.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so if you smile, your body will, your mind will eventually go like, "Hey, he's smiling. It means something positive is happening," and then it'll start releasing the happy hormones.
Yeah.
So it definitely works. I mean, I've faked every interview I've gone to. So
He fakes all these podcasts.
Well,
I do. I'm not usually a charismatic guy.
Well,
There you
it's
go. Well, you
where it
fooled me.
says,
You're
yeah,
hired
it's
a shot.
wait, what? I'm already getting out. It's like the quote that says, it's something along the lines of, if you say something confidently enough, anybody will believe what you say.
Mhm.
You know, so like if you present that as somebody who's like very enthusiastic about this topic or whatever, people just go like, oh, this person's enthusiastic. Like that's so I am with my anxiety. I start talking a lot more, and people are just like, oh, like, yeah, he just like talks a lot. I'm like, yeah, but because my thoughts don't stop. This is the only way to get it to, like, curtail a little bit.
21st century version of that is when you see posts with quotes on them online, and everyone thinks that it's a real quote, but in reality, it's not. Like, people just put quotes around something. At the bottom, they write Albert Einstein. It's like everyone goes out and believes them.
Like, I think for my graduate mentor, it was her birthday, and she was holding class that night, and so it was my cohort. We all got together, and we kind of had like a birthday party, and we had a birthday card that I got, and we started passing around. And she was really into this Frankfurt School of philosopher Theodor Adorno. And so in the card, I remember writing, as Theodor Adorno once said, "Alles gut zum Geburtstag," which is German for happy birthday. Now, I assume in his lifetime he said happy birthday, but I have no documentation whatsoever that he has said happy birthday. I just assume that it's one of those phrases that people has to have said in their life, especially if they're in a culture where they honor birthdays.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Sorry, I know we went off on a little tangent, but back to those strategies.
But what I was going to say about enthusiasm, and this will lead back to the other strategies, is on my teaching evaluations, I always tend to get high marks on enthusiasm. Like, students, without a doubt, whether they liked me or not, will always say, this guy's very enthusiastic. And I can't say I get such as high remarks for online learning because it's not the same environment. But I always joke about I get high on enthusiasm because I always try to be enthusiastic because I am inside, anxious, fearful, and that chatter in your head of like, it's not going well, people are staring at you, type of thing. And they don't see like the beads of sweat going down my back, but they do see my shoulders back, my chest is protruding, my chin is up, I'm making eye contact, I'm walking around, I'm using hand gestures. And so that's me sort of compensating for any sort of fears or anxieties that I have. And eventually you do it enough that eventually you become comfortable with it. Absolutely. Other strategies, and I'll just go quickly over them because those are the sort of the main strategies I recommend. Everything else is sort of based upon your own preference. So besides practice and preparation, being enthusiastic, and knowing the structure or formula of giving a speech, I think it's always good to realize that you're doing better than you think and feel. Whenever I ask students to critique themselves or self-evaluate themselves, they always grade themselves harder than I actually did. And, it goes back to that post-performance anxiety. I also would say that,
to speak to that one, I know earlier we were talking about sort of the order you go in and having that pre-performance anxiety. Funny enough, what I tend to do, or used to do, I guess, when I was in classes and we had presentations and things of that sort, was I would always volunteer to go first. Because as long as you go first, you have no pre-performance anxiety. In most cases, right? Because the teacher asks who wants to go first. You say you want to go, and you just go and do it. That you don't have time to have that pre-performance. But the other great thing about that was no one's gone before you yet. So the teacher doesn't have a gauge as to how to grade you versus other people. So they're grading you only on your performance versus if you, at least in my mind, that's how it would work. Versus if you went a little bit later, now they've seen some people, they have a gauge to what's a good speech, what's a bad speech, what's an average speech, and now they might start grading you sort of based on other people's performance as well.
I do. Well, I actually don't allow students to sign up for when they want to give their speech. I actually have them choose dates out of a hat because what I noticed is that you might get someone who wants to go first, and then all of a sudden it's, I want to be second, I want to be third, and then no one wants to go after that. And you're basically like being like, okay, if no one's going to go, I'm going to walk out of this classroom right now. And if you didn't give your speech, then you get a 0. And that's when people start to get out of their seats.
That's pretty funny.
But yeah, I usually assign them, and it's usually random, but it's just easier that way. And then it holds them accountable for being there on that particular day. Because if they don't show up to the day that they're giving their speech, then I add this rule, like if they can't provide legal or medical documentation, then they can earn partial credit on the speech that they give it in my office during office hours. Because the thing about teaching public speaking is it requires a certain lab component with students giving their speeches, and you're only given so much time. So if you have students that don't show up and your other days are pretty full, then you're not going to be able to squeeze them in. So it's sort of my way of maintaining that they're there. But I find that when any class you're taking, whether it's public speaking, biology, history, foreign language, you get as much out of it as you put in. So the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. The less you put in, the less you're going to get out of it. Absolutely.
I feel like it's the same with anything else in life.
True. And I think with public speaking, I feel like people don't realize that it's ephemeral. It's fleeting. It's in the moment. I don't even remember most of the time stuff that my students have said. That's why I've always taken notes when they're giving their presentations, because anytime a student wants to talk to me about a speech that they gave like last week, I certainly don't remember it. So I have to go back to my notes. On occasion, there are students that will give speeches, especially persuasive speeches, that on occasion will persuade me to take action, but they're very rare and far in between, because most students, when it comes to topics, they tend to go with like
generic stuff,
generic common topics that I've heard told so often that it's kind of having like the reverse effect. Like, I don't want to adopt animals. I don't want to recycle anymore. I don't want to vote for politicians. It's kind of having that reverse effect. So I try to keep it local issues. So on occasion, I do get students that have very great speeches. I had a student that gave a speech about the air quality. The Central Valley is notorious for poor air quality. And one of the call to actions, which is like the minor changes that we can do to bring about this change, was she suggested taking a box fan, and then getting an air filter and duct taping the air filter to your box fan. And when we were having fires in California last year, severe fires, and the air quality was bad, I literally got a box fan and an air filter and some duct tape, and I created an air filter. Now I use it to filter the air in my where I live, so that way it feels like fresh and it doesn't feel stale. Because I noticed,
that's awesome,
when I don't have the fan going. So this is like a rare occasion. I've listened to thousands of speeches, but it's like 1 out of every 1,000 that'll actually, push me to bring about change in my life. But yeah, I definitely will say. It's ephemeral, fleeting. You just got to step into your character, and then when it's over, step out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was about to say, when you first brought up talking about some of your students and how you don't remember a lot of their speeches. I was going to say, hopefully none of your students are listening. But then when you went into talking about all of the different things you've heard about and wish you could hear, sort of that you don't want to hear anymore. I think it would be a good thing if they were listening, so they'll know not to touch upon those topics.
Oh, I had a list. I called it the off topics list. And it was, I told students, all right, this is a list. If you give a topic on if you give a speech on one of these topics, the best you can do is a C. And then I realized that's just mean, because I'm not the only person in this audience. And so just because I may not be interested in what they have to say doesn't necessarily mean that other people in the audience aren't intrigued by it. I used to do themes in my public speaking classes. One semester I did a theme with food. That was really popular. I didn't realize how much people love talking about food. And
definitely.
And then the other theme, though, and I realized this is pretty selfish of me, and I feel bad after the fact, was on communication technologies. So that was my interest when I was in graduate school, was communication technologies. And so I had that as a theme. What I realized, though, is no one else is really interested in that theme. So that was a really tough one, because students had to give speeches on concepts that they don't really fully understand. But at the same time, also, I kept trying to reinforce, like, I'm not interested in you telling me everything about this. I want to know what you know about this topic and what you've learned and things like that. But teaching is trial and error. So you learn from your mistakes, much like students should learn from their mistakes, because that's how you don't make those mistakes and you make better decisions.
I
Absolutely.
mean, it's how life is for sure. Just
Mhm.
in general, if you don't make mistakes, you'll never learn.
Yeah.
That's something that growing up, I think it caused some tension between me and my dad
Hmm.
because obviously he was a parent, so he didn't want his kids to make the same mistakes he did, or just to make mistakes in general. But I've always been of the mindset that not the mindset, but I'm very much a rebel, and we've talked a little bit about sort of the four. What are they called, Matt?
Tendencies.
Tendencies, which is a great book and just talks about Matt's a questioner, I'm a rebel. But I've always been about I need to see it for myself, or learn it for myself, or experience it for myself in order for me to do or not do something, right? So if you tell me let's say a pan is hot and I shouldn't touch it, like, yeah, now that I'm old enough, I understand that, and I'm like, I'm not going to touch it if it's hot. But when I was younger, that concept didn't make sense to me yet. So if you're telling me not to touch it, I need a good enough reason, or I'm going to go and touch it, and then I'm going to get burned, and then next time I won't go and touch it because now I learned.
There you go. Yeah. I will say last year I had this revelation about teaching, and I didn't realize how much teaching is watching students make mistakes that you can stop them from doing. But at the same time, also, they need to learn that way. And so a lot of what I do sometimes is watching students make these mistakes, and all you could do is just guide them through it and hope that they learn from it, and that I always say that when it comes to ethical public speaking, you never really want to call someone out for mistakes or errors or things like that, because you don't know how that is going to affect them long-term wise, and sort of the feeling or trauma they might experience. And that's the last thing I want is, someone, not taking public speaking again or dropping out because of something I said or did. But at the same time, also, I feel like students need to learn from these mistakes. And sometimes they're ready to learn, and other times they need to keep making the same mistake until it finally sticks with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in constructive criticism. I think it almost in any case, unless obviously someone is already not feeling in the right, they're just not feeling well, or they're emotional, whatever it is. Just constructive criticism is always something that should be welcomed, because someone is trying to make you better, and there are obviously ways that some people approach it that may not be the right way. But and I know we've spoken about this a little bit before, but going a little bit into Stoicism, the Stoics always say it's not the action. Basically, nothing is inherently good or bad. It's your reaction to it, right? Like your perception of it that makes it good or bad.
Absolutely.
So that I think looking at it in a more positive way for all of that has helped me grow a lot. When someone makes a critique or a comment about something, if I choose to take it in a negative way and I choose to get mad about it or something, it's not helping me, and it's creating a tense situation. Whereas if I accept it for what it is, someone's opinion, and accept it with their best intentions, it's more of a way for me to grow.
It's a suggestion. You could either take it or not. I know when I catch students for plagiarism, I tell them, like, this does not define you. How you react will. And I like, they think I'm mad at them and they get really embarrassed. And I'm like, I'm not mad that you're plagiarizing. I'm mad at the fact that you thought I was dumb enough that I wasn't going to catch you.
I'm mad you got caught. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, and I'm amazed. Sometimes students even leave like the hyperlinks and like, especially online. And then I've been able to copy and paste something from a response they give, and boom, like Google search pops up right away. And I'm just all like, come on, like, this is not how you learn, or this is not how you should learn.
It takes you to top 10 presidential speeches, and you're like, I didn't think you were going to get away with this.
I did have a student recently. I won't go into too much detail out of respect for the student, but they had they were supposed to give a speech analysis, and they gave a speech analysis, but it was more like they were doing a summary of what everyone was saying about the speech, and it kind of bordered the lines of plagiarism because he wasn't citing, or the student was not citing their sources. So anytime you reference something that is not in your own words, you need to indicate to us that it is not yours but someone else's. So that was kind of recent, but I've had some pretty funny stories with students trying to plagiarize. I had students that submitted the pictures from the websites on their outline. So like it would literally be the web page with the pictures as part of their outline that they submitted. I've had students submit speeches that were English essays that were through Turnitin.com. With that, they submitted to Turnitin.com for other classes. Like I said, the hyperlinks. I've had students that have, it's a lot of different situations, and those are the types of students that I'm just amazed at how much work they put towards not having to do work.
Yeah,
and it's like if you shift that mindset to like, this is the work ethic I have, but I'm going to put it towards this. I think that the experience would be better.
I completely agree. Mm-hmm. I think the funniest story I'd heard of Turnitin.com was one time someone submitted, maybe it wasn't Turnitin.com, but one time a student submitted an essay or something to a professor, and it ended up being something that the professor had written like in grad school or something.
Nice.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, that was a good one. But speaking of cheating or plagiarizing, when I was in, I think I would have been in high school, I used to hate doing mathematical proofs.
Okay.
So when I was taking tests, I would always write the answer. Mm-hmm. And my teacher at first thought I was cheating. So for like the first 2 or 3 tests, she would call me and she's like, why are you cheating? How did you get to these answers? We need to see your work.
Yeah, I got to show your work.
Yeah, and I hated doing it because it was such a waste of time. I could, mm-hmm. I sort of calculated it all in my head and I would just write it down. So then I think one time she like put it in front of me, like basically sat me right in front and like a brand new test or something, and had me do it. And I did the same thing. Mm-hmm. And then after that, she was convinced that, I'm actually doing it in my head and not cheating somehow.
Okay.
So she let it slide a little bit more. I started showing a little bit of work. She let it slide a little bit more. So it worked out.
Well, I'm glad there was a happy ending to that story.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Speaking of, doing something out of like laziness in a sense, right? And also touching on how somebody can destroy your hopes and dreams with one comment. I think I mentioned this before, but I used to, in elementary school, middle school, be like the kid that always had his hand up. Like every single thing, I was like, oh, I'm going to participate,
you still do that, Matt?
Yeah, I do it now, but in high school, I didn't do it because I had a class, I think it was English, and I'm pretty sure I know who the teacher is. And I said something and she was like, oh, that's dumb. Or like, why would you say that? I'm like, bitch, you don't know what Shakespeare thinks? Like, what do you mean? It's like dumb. Like, you said you gave my interpretation. I gave my interpretation, right? And ever since then, it was one of those things I was like, all right, I guess I shouldn't speak up because what if I'm wrong again? And like, I didn't like that feeling. But when I was in college, I took this class on, it was like video game theory or something. And it was really cool. It was all about video games, right? We got to learn a bunch. But the teacher went up there, or the professor, I should say, and he's like, you have an assignment where you either have to write a 5-page paper or you have to, with the group, give a 5-minute speech. And I was just sitting there going, 5 pages? And then somebody's like, is it single spaced or double spaced? And he's like, let's just say single spaced. And I was like, single spaced? 5 pages? That's a lot of work. And at this time, because I had such a bad experience with some public speaking, I was like, fuck, I guess I'll write the paper, right? And then ultimately I was like, nah, screw it. I'll just give a speech, right?
Yeah.
And like all of us were like computer science majors anyways. So it was just one of those things where like I looked around and I was like, like I'm somewhat outgoing. Like maybe I can do an okay job at this, right? I think out of the class, maybe like 2 groups signed up to give a presentation, and like 80% of the class, it was all papers. But we had to talk about a video game. I love video games. So I got to talk about like motion capture in Call of Duty and how they got to implement it and all this stuff, like the technology behind it. And then some fucking kid in the back was like, isn't that from the wrong game? And I was like,
Oh.
no, this is the article that I read. Here's my source, right? This is based on, this is a picture directly from the article, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I was like, you little fucking dick. I was like, I bet you don't have the balls to get up here and give a speech, let alone you're criticizing me. But
plot twist, I was the student in the back.
no, but funnily enough, because me and Ashot, knew each other in college, we were in the same class, and we did have to give presentations in the same class.
I wasn't in that video game theory class.
No, different class.
Yeah.
But there was like our professor had us compete against other teams.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like my group in the back versus like a Shots group in the middle, because it was based on like where you sat.
Okay.
And I don't know,
And
like
Matt didn't like to sit with me back then.
Yeah, it's because you smelled, even though I can't smell. So
I never had a fraternity brother who was in the same major as me, so I never got to sit with any bros during class. I got to sit next to a lot of sorority girls or women. So
nothing wrong with that.
I mean, I just got to sit next to a Shot. That was okay. But it was something where like we both had to give a presentation that week, and because you pick like who's going to lead the presentation, so everybody else just stands up there, says like one word, and two people have to, like one person from each group leads it. And I was like, "Fuck it, a Shot. Let's just go head to head." And if I remember correctly, I won. But I don't know if that's just me rewriting the narrative here.
I think you're definitely rewriting the narrative.
Well, I will say that group presentations probably might deserve its own episode, because I've actually had the experience of I've had my own group member call me out during our group presentation for
as you were doing it,
as we were presenting. Yeah, he
Wow.
called me out because the information or the statement I made was not factual or something like that. But I actually, so if I was to choose a class that I really enjoy teaching, it's probably small group discussion, mainly because I really feel like public speaking is a great skill to have, but we so rarely give speeches, but we do a lot of group work, or we work with other people in groups. And so for me, I really enjoy group presentation or group communication, because you learn a lot about not only how groups work, but how you work with groups as well. And so that was one of the classes that I took. And going back to the educational journey I talked about earlier, that where I teach, I actually took classes in communication studies before I went to graduate school to see if this was something I was interested in. And the first class I took was small group discussion. And that I think I was the only one to get an A in the class, because it was a tough class, because working with other people is difficult. So You got to learn the skills and concepts and theories in order to make it work. And she also wrote me my letter of recommendation, or one of my letter recommendations for graduate school. And now that person is a colleague of mine, because when I teach and give in the classroom and give my educational journey, I'm basically teaching in the same classrooms that I was once a student in as well. So that's sort of when the full educational journey comes full circle.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went back to your education, because there was a question I wanted to ask you when you were telling your story, but I didn't want to interject.
Mm-hmm.
How did it feel going from being an anteater to a matador?
I'm not big on mascots. I will say, for me, every college or university I went to, I've sort of, remember things that were important to me at the time. So when I think about my time at UC Irvine, like there are certain things that pop up in my head. It's like when I did alternative spring break, when I was a RA for our fraternity house, and then everything else is just being, in a fraternity. And my story about how I got into the fraternity, I don't know if I told you this, but I basically got stalked by one of the guys. And so, which is very common when it comes to rushing or trying to get people to join the fraternity. So I was like, the first day was the Aldridge Park, and they had all the booths up and clubs. And so I'm like, okay, I want to meet people. I'm going to join a club. This is the best way to meet people. And I ended up kind of doing the whole circle. I gave my number out. I, gave my contact information, my name, to express interest. And then I think the last booth I passed am I allowed to say our fraternity name?
Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know if you could just beat me out if it's not okay.
No. You can definitely say it. We don't
I
care.
mean, we're gonna beep out most of what you said, to be honest.
I know, right?
It's just like,
Okay.
this is our friend Matthew. Beep.
He does beep. Yeah. And so I passed the Phi Gamma Delta, better known as Fiji, table. And I don't know if you knew this fraternity brother, but it was Mario. He passed me a flyer, and I kind of did this whole no thank you. And like I just kept walking, and I didn't find out about the story until after I had crossed. But apparently, after I said no thank you to the flyer, there were a group of them were like, "We're gonna rush this guy," and so I ended up like, and I knew that they were telling me the truth because they knew the last booth I was at before I was like, okay, I'm going to make my way back to Arroyo Vista, which is where the student housing was, where I was living at the time, in the humanities house. And so I think it was Scotty. I was like making my way towards the exit to go back to where I was living, and Scotty like kind of does this beeline to like, hey, how's it going? Extends his hand and shakes it and does his spiel. And then I just sort of gave him my contact information and my name. And I didn't think much of it because I did it to a lot of booths that day. And we're like, well, okay, we'll see who follows through. And then later on that day, I just moved in earlier and I was unpacking still. And I get a phone call from Andy. And he, of course, says that they're having this barbecue tonight and that they would love for me to come. And at that point, I didn't have any groceries, and I was living in student housing that didn't require a meal card. So I ended up I only had like, I think, peanut butter on me at the time. So I didn't have much in terms of a meal. So I was like, well, I'm not sure. They're like, well, we'll come pick you up. And I'm like, they're like, where do you live? I'm like, oh, I live in the humanities house. And they're like, dude, you live next door to us. Just come on over. And so I was like, okay. And so I remember vividly walking up the path to the house because I had no intention of joining a fraternity. I was not your typical frat boy douchebag. And it was nice to know not a lot of them were. A lot of them were like me. And so walking up the path, and then all of a sudden I am kind of immersed in this whole like getting to meet people. Like they're introducing you to people, they're finding out stuff about you, then they invite you back. And so I found out after I had crossed that they actually targeted me to be the fraternity after I had passed down the flyer. And I'm actually really grateful because going back to when we talked about the mascot thing, the matador and the anteater, for me, being an anteater is, being a fraternity brother, because a lot of the opportunities and the experiences that I had are really because of being in this fraternity. Not necessarily fraternity related, but kind of influenced me. Like when I was an RA, I worked in housing, and that was its own experience. And I actually made friends who were non-Greeks through doing that. And when we were doing all the training, it's funny, all the other RAs thought I was they called them HAs, but the RA is a resident advisor for one of the honors houses. They didn't believe I was the RA or HA for the Fiji house. And then that led me to then doing like alternative spring break, which was another opportunity because the spring break prior to that, I had gone to Mexico to build a house with a bunch of fraternity brothers. And that kind of influenced me to spend my following spring break doing something similar like that. I don't think the opportunity to go back to Mexico and build another house was there, but I did do this environmental retreat in San Bernardino National Forest, and it was just such a great opportunity. So I think I reflect back on a lot of my opportunities and events in my life, and I definitely am grateful for having turned that flyer down, because then all of a sudden I became this target, and that led me to pledging, better understanding what it means to be a fraternity brother, as well as, of course, other opportunities that arise through it. When I told my family that I was rushing a fraternity, they all laughed. They thought it was funny. And
Same here.
It was
same here.
Well,
actually, my family didn't even know what a fraternity was. So
well, I had a couple of cousins who were in fraternities, but I didn't display the typical traits or characteristics of a fraternity brother. But then you join one and you find there's a lot of other guys just like you, and it's only those one or two guys who fit the stereotype that ruin it for the rest of us. But
Right.
someone's got to throw the party.
I had a similar experience, funny enough, and I don't remember if I've talked about this experience on the podcast yet. But my first year in college, I said I'm not joining a fraternity. Just dead out. Did not even think about it. Did not even rush. And it was because of the same thing, right? The sort of the stories you hear about how frat guys are, and frat guys are this and that, and all this hazing and stuff. So it wasn't something that I was open to doing. But once I met some fraternity people, I became more open to the idea. And then over the summer, I got a job and I started working. And then graduate brother, who had just graduated, Emilio, was working the job as well. And he found out that I was thinking, and then he brought me around the house. I met the guys and very similarly connected with them immediately. And then the rest is history.
I can't, I can't tell you how many lies I've told to other guys trying to rush them. Like I remember, nothing like about the fraternity, like lies about like things. I remember I rushed this one guy, and and I think I said that when we were talking about each other, I was like, "Oh, let's hang out," and he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "You really into sushi?" And I was like, "Absolutely." I didn't like sushi, but I was all like, "Yeah, let's get sushi sometimes." And then hey, we're getting sushi. Do you mind if I bring a couple of friends? Yeah, sure. Of course, they're fraternity brothers. And then, he's like, "Can I bring a friend too?" And I was like, "Yeah, bring a friend too." And then that's kind of, we ended up both of those guys ended up rushing and joining.
Nice.
And it was just kind of funny because it's like sometimes, like I tolerate sushi, but it's not something I crave. So it's kind of like a little white lie as opposed to like a full out lie. But it's little things like that you kind of, I feel like for me, besides the whole idea of replacing yourself, for me, it was like I had a great experience. And if someone else was interested in these sort of experiences, I wanted to kind of share my experience with them and see if they were interested in being a part of something like that. So.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if I hadn't joined the fraternity, obviously Matt hadn't joined the fraternity, this podcast would have never happened.
Exactly.
So I'm very thankful of the fraternity too. And a lot of other things, I was, the first job I got, I later spoke to my boss about it, because during my interview, I mentioned that I was president of the fraternity. And he said that was one of the things that helped me get the job, because, if you can manage 50 drunk college guys, you can definitely, manage working at in a professional setting. His words, not mine. So
I've given that same exact pitch because I was, president before a shot, and they're like, when you have no experience, like, well, what do you do? I was like, well, I was president of fraternity. Like, oh, cool. How's that? And I was like, well, you explain it, and you're like, 50 people, 60 people that can just tell you no, right? Like, you have no real control over them. I can't make them do anything. In the professional world, if you don't do what your boss says, you're going to get pipped or you're going to get fired, right? Like, there's a process involved. There's HR, there's, shit to help out the company. But in this situation, none of that. So, it's all just, serendipitous how it all just flows together. And like every moment in your past led you to this exact moment right now.
Absolutely. And it goes into this whole idea of like your life as this journey or this hero's journey. And you really don't quite realize the journey you're on until you look back at the moments in your life, because, you can't really see where the future will take you, but you can see where it's led you so far.
Yeah, there's a really good Steve Jobs quote from a commencement speech he gave, where he says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward.
There you go.
Which I think is very relevant.
Yeah, that was a big topic that I had to learn in therapy. Was my therapist is like, look how far you've come, what you've accomplished in life. Because for me, I'm always, nose down, grinding, looking forward to the next peak. And she's like, but if you stop and you take a moment to look, you have this beautiful view of like the life that you've crafted so far, right? You went to university, you got a good job, you did all these things that you never thought you would do when you were younger for whatever reason, right? Like you just didn't know where you're going to find your place in the world. And now that you're on that kind of like rat race in the corporate life, she's like, you have to stop and say like, look at what you've accomplished, right? And even, reflecting upon like our first session with her, and then like when she basically, I mean, she didn't kick me to the curb, but she was kind of like, there's not much we can do here. So then like now I'm back seeing her again after COVID and everything, just to kind of recalibrate and realign, moving forward. And it's just great. But I'm like, yeah, remember that time 3 years ago you said this? Like, and I'm like, I like, show up my notes on my phone, and I was like, I talked about this. Like, I wrote a fucking post, like a Dear Diary post about, like, it was literally like, stop and look at the journey, like see how far you've come.
Okay,
so it definitely.
So I wasn't going to share this, but I have this bulletin board that essentially is kind of like a vision board. But I have this printout of just sort of like strategies when you feel overwhelmed or anxious and things like that. And I believe that I got this from my therapist. And I folded it up and I pinned it on my vision board. And I wrote, in case of emergency.
That's perfect. I love that.
So yeah, because you never know when you're going to get triggered, or something's going to happen again, or something you're not in control of. So it's always kind of nice to have like those strategies in place, much like, when it comes to speaking in front of an audience, those strategies that you could rely on to help reevaluate and help you focus more on the being present and in the moment. So definitely agree.
Definitely. Very cool. And I know we went on a very long tangent, but I think we're finally curbing back onto the road we were on. What were some other strategies for public speaking?
I honestly, at this point, the only thing that I would probably share, it's more along the lines of just things like noting, like when you have thoughts or feelings that run through your head, like thoughts like, oh, I'm not a very good public speaker, or, oh, they're all staring at me, or you feel anxious, or you feel like, I don't know, afraid. You just got to note it. So like, oh, that's thinking. Oh, that's a feeling. Was it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And of course, I'm saying the words of Andy Puddingcombe, I believe is his name, the founder of Headspace, the meditation app. And that's something that I do when I lecture now. Like when I say something and everyone just stares at me, and I'm like, okay. And a thought comes to my head, they don't understand what I'm saying. I'm not a very good teacher. That sort of chatter in your head. And then you just have to be like, oh, that's just thinking. And then, or oh, that's just a feeling. And then you just got to reevaluate. Okay, so why is it that everyone's staring at me? Probably because they don't understand what I just said. So let me ask a question, or let me rephrase what I have to say. Or maybe I should just move on to something else and just say, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me, or things like that. In terms of other strategies, know you're going to make mistakes. Even with this podcast, I try to come off as, professional as I could. But there is going to be a point where you will make a mistake. And sometimes I correct myself, like briefly note, like if I choose a word that I didn't want, or I didn't feel best represents. So in those types of cases, I will either make a brief correction, or in some cases, like the mistake isn't even that noticeable, and you should just continue on and know that mistakes are learning opportunities. And breathing is another important thing. I feel like you got to control your breathing for something that we do our entire life. I feel like a lot of us are really bad at it. It's like listening. We mainly listen. Like 80% of what we do is listening, but a lot of us are really poor listeners, and it's a skill. Like public speaking, you have to work on it. And even myself, I try to work on it, and I found that the hardest thing about video sharing or Zoom is being attentive and listening, because I thought I had, I kept cutting people off. And then apparently I was told, or I came across an article that said that there's this like pause for the transfer of audio and video. And I wasn't aware about that. So I felt like I kept cutting people off in the conversation. But at the same time, also, if you are attentive and strive to be an active listener and really work on limiting the distractions, it's something that you could improve upon. And I know that's something I'm really striving for, because a lot of what I do when I'm listening to these speeches. So to be attentive, I really have to strive to be an active listener, because I'm the thing about when I'm listening to these speeches is I'm not just listening, but I'm also taking notes and I'm grading. So I'm having to multitask, which I don't like to multitask. I'm a monotasker, and I'm happy with that. I mean, there's certain things, like if it's a passive activity and I want to do something a little more active, then I'll do that. But otherwise, it's not something.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
completely
we're
agree.
as humans historically bad at multitasking.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just something that we've kind of tricked everybody to thinking that that's how you be more productive, when really, like,
No.
you answering 6 different messages while trying to figure out an email and doing this just causes a ton of chaos in our mind
oh yeah,
and really just hits you with anxiety. So for me, like, that happened to me at work earlier, where I was just like, holy like, what the
Yeah.
hell do I do? And then I just was like, all right, stop everything, like, take a break, put on some music,
Yeah.
relax a little bit, and then write out a to-do list of, like, what's most important right now. Go do that thing, go do the next thing, right?
Mhm.
Kind of reframing it and refocusing. And yeah, I mean, all these tips that you gave have been just so amazing, because for me, it's selfish because we get to pick your brain, but I also have to start facilitating these group meetings at work where we're
Mhm.
doing training sessions for some of our new clients.
Mhm.
And I have to be, the person on camera who's got, 10, 15 people there, and they're just all staring at me, or maybe not,
Yeah.
if they choose to, turn their camera off. So it's really helpful to have that as a framework to fall back on,
Mhm.
and remembering things, like you said, to, like, be present, to
Yeah.
breathe, to note those thoughts, right? Why is everybody looking at me funny or whatever? Because sometimes, especially over Zoom, we had a little Zoom episode previously, or what is it, like teleconferencing? I think is what we call
Teleworking,
it, teleworking.
teleconferencing, whatever it was.
And it's just one of those things where it's weird, because I'll say jokes a lot. That's how I
Mhm.
try to relate to people.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll crack a joke on Zoom, and you don't hear anybody laughing because they're muted. And maybe sometimes you see somebody laughing and you go, yes, I got him.
Yeah.
But most of the time you're just like, fuck, did I just bomb? Like,
Yeah.
that joke always works, like, for
Or it's
instance,
just not funny, Matt.
No,
Yeah,
it was a great joke. It was about how I make money off of fears, and my brother makes money off of fears.
Was your delivery better than mine? Because I really feel like that's really important when it comes to jokes.
Well, I delivered right now. I totally bombed it.
Yeah.
But
Well, when I told my brother about this podcast I was going on, and how I was going to talk about my best man speech, and I was going to say, talk about that joke, and he's like, I'm actually a crematory operator now. So he's moved.
You have to
up in the
update.
mortuary
You have to update
world.
the joke.
Yeah. So he burns bodies for a living. So
Wow.
yeah, that's what an anthropology degree will get you in life. So
that's
Very
cool.
good. That's good to
burns
know.
bodies, and you burn speeches that people submit for you. Huh?
exactly.
You print them out. You're like, this is just fuck. You do the Simon Cowell. This is rubbish, and just light it on fire in front of them.
The Byrne brothers. That's who we are.
There you go. I mean, that'd be one way to scar somebody from ever saying a word again in a public space. Just literally take their speech off the podium and just light it on fire.
There you go.
Actually, that might be a good strategy to going back to one of the strategies that it's ephemeral. They give the speech, and then you have them light the speech on fire.
Oh,
Okay,
very
it's
solid.
ephemeral.
Yeah,
Why
right?
don't we just wipe their mind like in Men in Black, and we'll never have to even think about it.
No, but Matt, like you were saying, I think a lot of these were very valuable, Matthew. And I think the one that stands out to me the most is the fact that it's ephemeral.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a lot of cases, that's what gives people a lot of that post-performance anxiety, is the fact that people are going to remember that I messed up. They're going to remember the speech. They're going to remember this and that. But what most people don't realize, as well as myself, is that no one's going to remember. That they don't care. I don't want to say they don't care, but in most cases, they have other things to worry about than a speech that you gave, in front of a class, or your best man speech, or whatever it is. In the moment, yes, they were listening, but as soon as it was over, they moved on.
Absolutely.
Unless you're known as the speech guy in the family.
Well,
Isn't that the isn't there, like, I believe it's a Maya Angelou quote where she says,
I was just going to talk about that. Thank you.
Go for it.
Please. Oh, no. You introduced
No,
it.
you're the guest first.
Okay,
That's
well,
how we do it here.
So I thought this, so it's this Maya Angelou quote about how, and of course I'm going to have to summarize or paraphrase it. It's people don't remember what you taught them, or what you told them, they remember how you made them feel.
Yep.
And
there it
it's
is.
so
Round
true.
of applause, baby.
Thank you. I mean, it's not like in quotes on like Instagram or anything like that with Maya Angelou underneath it, but
Make
essentially,
sure to cite it in your bibliography. All right, I'm
I
watching
know
you. No
I live
plagiarism
by
here.
points.
It would have been funny if you're like, yeah, people only people only remember
He
how
stole
you
it up as his
feel,
own.
not what you told them. It's like, I'm pretty sure I've heard that before. Where did I
He's
hear
like, he's like, yeah, this is just one of those little white lies.
that?
Like
It's
the
like, this
sushi.
is what I tell my students all the time. All right, it's like, how did I feel? My hope for you is that moving forward, you're like the Gordon Ramsay of speech critique.
Oh wow, that's that's a big shoes to fill. I mean, honestly, I love public speaking, but it's not my favorite. I usually only try to teach one class each semester. Some usually two though, but at the same time, also I feel like I enjoy it, but it's the more you do it, the less enthusiastic I become, and with it, just because I feel like sometimes students aren't as creative with the topics as I would like. And like, I'll give you an example when we went fully online, and I was having students give the persuasive speech prompt, which was a local issue. I kept getting speech after speech about mental health, about COVID, and about college tuition, and then it really started to make me very depressed after a while, just because it was a lot of heavy topics, and people were sharing personal stories or stories about other people. But I do still love the performative aspect of it. Public speaking is a performance. And so I love when a student gives a really great speech and I'm there to witness it. But right now, I feel like I'm kind of getting a little bit drained with public speaking because I'm having to watch a lot of videos, and it's not the same as it is in the classroom. So that's the hard part about teaching online.
It's the same thing as if like listening or watching a comedy routine on Netflix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then actually going to the performance live. There's an energy in the crowd that you don't
Absolutely.
get, while you're on your couch watching it.
I completely agree.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out too is I really love the framework of like the pre-preparation, the preparation, the pre-performance, the performance, and the post-performance, because that to me is so relatable for anxiety to every other aspect. Because like for me, years ago, I was like, I don't want to go on a plane. I haven't been on a plane in years. Like, what if I panic on the plane and I have to like puke?
Yeah.
Well, there's only one bathroom and everybody's gonna fucking hear it because I'm loud. Or what if I need help, or what if I can't get help, and like, what if I'm trapped, and what if I'm like the crazy guy that's like, let me off the fucking plane, and I try to grab the the door.
Yeah.
And this is funny because I used to work in the aerospace industry, so I knew a lot about planes, and I wasn't worried about the plane crashing or anything. I was just worried like, what if I freak out and can't get help? But for me, it's like planning a trip, right? The second somebody says like, hey, let's go plan this trip, I'm like, oh my god, the pre-preparation kicks in. Like, fuck. When is this? It's 6 months down the road. I have to think about this shit for 6 months. And then eventually, you work your way through the stages, and you're like, during the performance, you're like, whatever. Like the plane ride was a little bumpy, not a big deal, right? But it's just so relatable because no matter what type of anxiety you're going through at home, you can map out to where you're feeling what in it, and then use that as kind of a framework to say like, why am I feeling this way now?
Yeah.
Right? What do I feel like after? Because we talked about going on roller coasters and how that's very similar to anxiety a lot of times, right? You have such a big buildup while you're waiting in line. And something that got me to go on roller coasters, because I'm not a big roller coaster guy, was I had a front of the line pass, and it was like literally you walk up the back of the line and just get on it, right? So at that point, it was like I had no hesitation. It was just like me and another friend. Hey, we're gonna go on this ride. Okay, cool. I'm not even thinking about the ride or how scary it is or whatever, right? How it's gonna make me feel. I'm just like, oh, cool, we're on it. Next thing you know, like we're there. 3, 2, 1, takeoff.
Yep.
I couldn't even think about it. But before, when I tried to go on that ride years ago in high school, I got so panicked because it was an hour wait to get on it.
Oh.
So I'm just like waiting in line. Oh my god. And you hear people screaming and whatever. And then, you look at somebody, oh my God, did they have a good experience, a bad experience? What's going on? And then eventually I'm just like, fuck it. I don't want to wait an hour for this.
Yeah.
I have to pee. Let's just get out of line and leave, or I have to take a shit or something, right? Especially with stress and anxiety. Like Ashad has talked about, like if you have a lot of anxiety, sometimes it causes your stomach to be upset, and you're like, well, yeah, I gotta go poop. Sorry, I can't wait in the scary line.
Yeah, I guess this went way longer than I thought it would, and way off topic. But it's great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And we can definitely talk about whenever you're free, having you on again if you're up for it.
I'd love to, absolutely, because I feel like in my mind, I was already crafting how this was going to go, even though I'd never been on a podcast. And in the beginning, I don't know if you noticed, I was trying to like bridge to the next topic, and I was like, just let it flow, man. Just enjoy it for what it is. And then eventually, this is when we ended up on topics such as poop.
No, we used to do the same thing, Matthew.
Yeah.
So when we first started, we would have an outline of our episode, and we would go from topic to topic. And again, like you said, I think it just comes with doing it enough times where you find what works and what, there are definitely podcasts out there that still do that and are very much on topic, and that's their style. And I feel like we have this what did you call it? What was that word?
Yeah, the E word. The type of speech where you give it with an outline.
Extemporaneous, yes.
Extemporaneous type of podcast where
time's fast.
We'll just talk and improvise, and we'll have like some notes about topics that we want to touch upon, but we'll more or less let it flow naturally.
Okay, because this went from extemporaneous to impromptu, which is the other method of delivery. So you got memory, you got manuscript, you got impromptu, and you got extemporaneous. I feel like had we read something verbatim on this podcast, we probably would have covered all four.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the quotes we kind of did. The Steve Jobs quote I gave was a direct quote. So there you go.
But you got to be reading off of it.
But yeah, I guess that was memory technically. Yeah. You're right.
It's true. Right. I mean, what do you mean? Stoicism is finding meaning in struggles, the path to a purposeful life filled with a meaning.
There you go. You just read that.
Yeah. Well, obviously, in the future, if we decide to talk more about Stoicism, that would be great for everybody because we touch on that a lot.
Great.
Fraternity experience, that's something we haven't really touched on too much.
Okay.
We've touched a lot in like men's groups, women's groups, like social groups type of thing, but specifically fraternities, and maybe that'll help make people have a better perception of it overall, right? Instead of just all of us being the frat boy douchebags that we once were, but now we're much older and mature.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know, maybe I opened up my shell too, and now that a shot poked fun at me in the beginning, and me and Matthew will go for 6 days talking like this. Oh, Shot's just like he's sleeping in the background. He's like, I took a nap. All right, you guys are still going?
Yeah. We thought you were engaged. Yeah, no worries. And I know like one of the things I was actually excited to talk about, but I totally it's a whole episode unto itself. This year of fear that I talked to you all about, because for me, a lot of the anxiety and stress and depression that I've experienced in my life, I feel like this year I've really, really several years, but within this last year when I kind of made it my year of fear, I feel like this past year I've made the biggest strides, because once you kind of figure out what it is that you're fearful of and how to overcome it, it feels like a whole new you afterwards. And so, it's not easy. And so there's plenty of strategies and things that I'm doing and still trying to learn and do. So I
think that's a really good way to end it and leave, we'll leave that year of fear as a preview for the next time that you come on. We'll touch upon that subject for the next time, but we really appreciate you doing this. And I know it took a lot of time, and we had to go through some technical difficulties throughout it, but we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the insight and you opening up.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed the experience and got something out of it as well.
I did, and I appreciate it. And I'd love, if possible, I'd love to come back and share more, because I definitely, and like I mentioned earlier, I think this is great what you're doing. And I feel like if I could help contribute and continue the conversation, I'm all the more for it. So Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Definitely possible, and we would definitely love to have you.
We accept. You can replace a shot starting next week.
There you go. Sign off. There you go.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you guys a couple days.